This week on Secret New Zealand, we investigate a homegrown conspiracy to undermine our elected government. And the mysterious death of a popular Prime Minister. Was Norman Kirk murdered by foreign assassins?
How's this for the ultimate Kiwi conspiracy theory? A global superpower and local zealots conspire to assassinate Helen Clark, destabilise the country and bring the entire Labor government to its knees. Yep, that sounds like the plot of a Robert Ludlum novel. But 30 years ago, the world was a very different place, and our Prime Minister of the day wouldn't hum along to the tune that almighty America was singing.
The man of great labour is our big Norm. The man of social credit is our big Norm.
Norman Kirk was one of the most popular Prime Ministers in New Zealand history, but he wasn't one of our longest lived, dying suddenly after only 21 months in the top job. The official cause? A heart problem. But ever since his death, there have been whisperings, rumours, vague suggestions that Big Norm might have been murdered. Theories abound. A right-wing conspiracy? Assassination by the CIA? Or was it just an overweight man who didn't look after himself? Norman Kirk was a self-educated engine driver from Waimate, who left school at 12. A shy young man who rode his pushbike 80 miles to visit his fiancée Ruth. Norm was equally tireless when it came to working for Labor. As he rose through the ranks, his energy and commitment played a big part in revitalising a party that had languished for decades in opposition. With Big Norm at the helm, Labor swept into power in a 1972 election landslide. A popular, compassionate man, he genuinely cared about the welfare of ordinary Kiwis who'd put him in the top job. And Norman Kirk wasn't afraid to state New Zealand's view forcibly in world forums like the UN.
I am convinced that the people of every country are sick of war and the threat of war.
The New Zealand public fell in love with his working-class hero, but some right-wingers feared and hated him. Kirk radically changed the direction of our foreign policy. We'd been close allies of America since World War II, but suddenly he was cuddling up to the Russians.
Our big Norm, the hero of our communism.
Big Norm.
Some believe that Big Norm and his Red friends posed such a threat to American security that the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, was ordered to assassinate him. But how could that have been done without causing world outrage?
Most New Zealanders don't know this man Kirk.
In 1972, Bob Harvey was in advertising, working closely with Norman Kirk on his election campaigns. He repackaged the leader and played a key role in Labor's success.
I think there's been a possibility always that in the last few months of his life, he could have been a victim of foul play.
Today, Harvey's theory sounds fantastic, but you have to remember the state of world politics at the time.
These were a time of terror in the world, a world that we don't even know that exists in a way, a time when the hands of the clock, the nuclear clock, were about 1 second to midnight.
In the early 70s, the hot war in Vietnam was winding down, but the Cold War was in full swing. Russia and America were slugging it out for world supremacy, and we all lived in fear of terminal nuclear holocaust. While Nixon and Khrushchev flexed their muscles, behind the scenes, spies and secret agents were hard at work. The Soviet spy service, the KGB, and the American Secret Service, the CIA, both had operatives collecting information and influencing political events in many countries, including ours. The National Party painted the Labor government as commie lovers, but Kirk was in fact anti-communist. He just happened to realise that comfy isolationist New Zealand needed to be nudged into the real world.
Kirk to me was a visionary leader, and he actually dreamt big dreams. Here is a man that wanted to deal with the Arabs. He wanted to do a deal with barrel price for lamb. He wanted to deal with the Russians for barter, with tractors.
Right-wing conservatives and the Americans watched in outrage as Kirk abolished compulsory military training and brought Kiwi troops home from Vietnam. He opened new embassies in the Soviet Union and China and sent a frigate to Mururoa to protest French nuclear testing.
We've worked against the development of nuclear weapons. We've opposed their testing everywhere and anywhere.
To the hardliners in the CIA, New Zealand was turning pink and going soft on communism. They worried that if Kirk continued on his way, he could undermine the dominance of the United States in the South Pacific.
The CIA probably had an involvement. I actually think it's probably a little bit more complex than that, and probably much more wide-ranging. He was a danger to the powers that wanted to own the South Pacific.
In Chile, the CIA had already promoted the ruthless military coup which resulted in the murder of leftist President Salvador Allende and the toppling of his democratic but left-leaning government. Top-secret documents relating to the coup have recently been declassified. They show that the CIA also turned a blind eye to murder and human rights abuses. When Prime Minister Kirk met President Richard Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger in Washington soon after the coup, he pulled no punches, and speaking at the Washington Press Club, he said, and I quote, "I am filled with dismay at the relative silence of democracies when a legitimate government, democratically elected, is put out of office by illegal and violent means." Closer to home, the CIA was also implicated in the downfall of Australia's left-wing government of the time. Aussie Labor PM Gough Whitlam had upset the Americans on a number of fronts. Like Kirk, he pulled the troops out of Vietnam, and he was opposed to the renewal of a spy satellite base in Australia run by the Americans. When he was sacked from office over an international loan scandal, many saw the hand of the CIA at work.
Whitlam was absolutely opposed to the CIA tracking station in Pine Gap, and because of that, he simply ran foul of the system that existed at that time.
The Americans also feared the influence of left-wingers in key trade unions. Veteran unionist Ken Douglas was well aware of the pressure.
There was a very heavy influence of the CIA and the State Department in New Zealand at that time. There was direct interference in the trade unions, opposition to the Federation of Labour's policy of opposing the nuclear testing.
But were those agents here just to collect information, or were they under orders to do something about what they found? Something like kill the man responsible.
By 1973, Nixon was about to be driven from office by the Watergate scandal, but Secretary of State Henry Kissinger still played a powerful and some say sinister role in foreign policy. So if Kissinger had ordered the CIA to remove Kirk, how might they have done it? Norm Kirk's political image maker Bob Harvey believes he knows one way.
Kirk had suffered a number of what you might call minor heart attacks. And I noticed that also some of those followed handshaking. And the favourite way of those agents was to basically coat the hand with a substance that was impervious and then coat the hand with a shellfish toxin and shake the hand, passing the toxin into the palm. Within about 10 minutes, the recipient broke out into a terrible sweat, started to have palpitations, and basically went into a collapse. And that was that. It's a pretty powerful toxin.
In fact, Kirk had several heart attack-like turns, but the one that marked the beginning of the end came during a trip to India.
On Kirk's trip when he went to India, he appeared to me and to most of his colleagues, he came back almost as changed man, as though there was something wrong with him.
Could the heart attack in fact have been a reaction to something poisonous? The Prime Minister knew he had powerful enemies and he didn't trust the Security Intelligence Service, the SIS, a department he was theoretically in charge of. He was so convinced that there was a fox in his henhouse that he had meeting rooms swept for hidden microphones. Kirk's health continued to deteriorate, and as he got sicker, his personality changed. He boasted of a black book in which he listed the names of those he regarded as enemies. As his paranoia grew, he started keeping an air pistol in his office and using the parliamentary pigeons for target practice.
He was a man surrounded by dangers, both foreign and homegrown. Kirk's radical changes to foreign policy attracted the attention of the CIA and also galvanised a group of right-wing New Zealanders against him. Friends of Big Norm believed that they were plotting to remove him from power, by force if necessary.
John had been contacted by this person at his home late in the evening and advised of this list and that a coup was imminent.
Pat Kelly, John Williams and Ken Douglas were all union officials at the time. John was told of a list that had been posted in the officers' mess at an army camp of people they thought should be taken out in the event of a military coup. John was told of only one name on this list of troublemakers, his own. He'd just returned from observing the political chaos and violence in Chile, and he was scared. He contacted Douglas and Kelly.
To be confronted with this idea that there might be a coup in New Zealand, on one hand seemed bizarre, but on the other hand, in the context of the fast-moving world events, perhaps wasn't so bizarre at all.
As supporters of Norman Kirk, Douglas and Kelly felt compelled to tell the Prime Minister.
He did take it seriously. It seemed pretty clear at the time that he knew something was afoot. And we were sort of confirming what he suspected or had been advised about, and asked us to thank us very much, but for us to sort of put it in the desk now and forget about it, that he would deal with it.
Did Williams and his fellow unionists and leftists on that list have real reason to fear? Yes, according to one man involved in the anti-Kirk forces.
I think if you're on any list associated with Mr. Kirk, you'd have reason to worry.
His name is Paul Freeman. He calls himself a businessman, and whatever business he's been in has seen him popping up in trouble spots all over the Pacific since the 70s. Widely rumoured to be one of the coup plotters, he was then and is now a difficult man to get a straight answer out of.
There was no known military conspiracy. It'd be wrong to say that. There may be a group of like-minded people who had had similar experiences within the context of the military, who were disenfranchised or disenchanted by what was happening in New Zealand in the early years of the Kirk administration.
Freeman is coy about his own involvement. You were in the army?
Yes, some have said that.
Well, you have had a military background, haven't you?
Oh, indeed, yes. Small one.
The way Freeman remembers it, there were a lot of New Zealanders who liked New Zealand just the way it was, and Kirk's radical changes weren't appreciated.
So I just think this was one of those periods in New Zealand's life where we had a slight change of direction, and we had to give it a slight nudge back to what we thought was the real New Zealand.
And part of that nudging was staying friendly with the United States.
Certainly.
The conspirators wanted a national government back in power, but while they had to put up with Labour, they wanted Finance Minister Bill Rowling in the top job. As an ex-army man, they thought he was more likely to see things their way. And on the 31st of August 1974, they got their wish. Norman Kirk was dead. Almost immediately, the rumours started that there was more to his untimely demise than natural causes.
So who, or what, had killed Norman Kirk? CIA spooks or natural causes? Poison or a heart attack? The death certificate is clear: congestive cardiac failure. Big Norm had a history of heart problems, dating back to a childhood brush with glandular fever, which left him with an enlarged heart. He was a big man, and in later years, he got bigger.
To start and get the country moving so that the rights of the people.
4 months after the Indian episode, he underwent a double varicose vein operation. While under anaesthetic, one of his lungs collapsed. On his release from hospital, he was still very sick. Not that you'd hear it from him.
I still see the doctor regularly, and he's pretty pleased with me.
On August the 28th, 1973, the last photograph of him was taken as he was admitted to Wellington's Home of Compassion for observation. Within 3 days, he was dead. The nation mourned. But the end of Kirk's life did not end the political machinations in this country. Kirk's actions had set in motion events that would eventually bring down his own party. Within a month, one of his advisors, a left-wing economist and head of a government department, was arrested for spying, not for the CIA, but for the KGB, the Russians. At 8:30 on the very night that Kirk got out of hospital after his varicose vein operation, Dr. Bill Such secretly met Soviet Embassy Second Secretary Dmitry Ruskovorov. However, that meeting and several others in the weeks leading up to Kirk's death were not as secret as Such thought. He was being watched by the SIS. At the trial, the SIS produced neither motive nor any details of what information might have been traded with the Russians. Such was found not guilty and died of natural causes not long after. Bob Harvey believes that Such wasn't spying for the Russians, but rather negotiating trade with them at his Prime Minister's behest.
Clearly, Such was a confidant of Norman's. I remember meeting where he would come up, there was backstairs in those days, and Such would join us, and we would talk about Russia, the possibilities of Russia. Kirk said, let's try bartering with the Russians. They need bloody food, he'd say.
The court case brought to light the existence of Kirk's clandestine think tank. A brilliant economist, Such was invited to advise the Prime Minister on financial matters so secret, not even Kirk's official advisor, Minister of Finance Bill Rowling, knew about them. The police search of Such's study uncovered the think tank and its organiser Gerald O'Brien, Vice President of the Labour Party, a man who shared Kirk's radical financial ideas. The police interviewed him at length, and a copy of the interview transcript went to the SIS. Prime Minister Bill Rowling had no idea that the think tank ever existed and that members of his caucus were still meeting behind his back. But when Paul Freeman handed him a copy of the SIS report, the cat was out of the bag. It was the anti-Kirk plotters' final act to sabotage Big Norm's legacy. But then things didn't quite go the way Freeman planned. 2 weeks later, Paul Freeman returned from a trip to Australia to find the media waiting for him.
I understand that you're the person who gave the papers relating to the Such case to the Prime Minister at the airport here the other day. Is that in fact correct?
Which day was this?
Well, about 2 weeks ago, I understand. You must have heard the publicity about it.
No, I've been in Australia.
How long have you been in Australia?
4 days.
Before that, did you ever give any papers to Mr. Rowlings relating to the Such case?
I hand papers to the Prime Minister quite often. They came to me through the mail.
They were posted to you?
Yes.
Do you know who posted them to you?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell us that?
No.
Nearly 30 years later, Freeman is prepared to tell more. Do you know who they came from?
Oh, certainly.
And that man was?
Well, later it was interpreted to have come from a man called Rohan Naldrit Jays.
Jays was an SIS agent. How well do you know Jays?
I knew Rohan Jays very well.
Do you know why they would have posted them to you?
I've got no idea at all. I know exactly why he did it, and that was because he knew that if I received something like that, I would endeavour and I would succeed in giving it directly to the Prime Minister.
Freeman keeps extensive records. He showed us some of them.
There are many letters from Rohan Jays. Some more official than others.
Now, what exactly do you do, Mr. Freeman? Can you explain that? A political lobbyist is one expression or term that's being used.
I spend 24 hours a day living.
Have you ever provided services for the CIA in any way?
I can't confirm or deny that.
Apart from the Jays document, have you ever provided services for the New Zealand SIS?
No.
If the Prime Minister knew whose side Paul Freeman was on, he wasn't telling.
Mr. Freeman is a man of many parts. I'm not too sure that each part knows what the other part is doing, but I couldn't comment much further than that.
Bill Rowling ordered an investigation into the SIS, and Rohan Jays was forced to resign, but the damage was already done. Already rocked by Kirk's death, the scandal cost Labour dearly. Rob Muldoon moved in for the kill.
You governed the country back there in Parliament buildings with policies, and they didn't have any policies.
Big Norm must have been turning in his grave as National swept to power in the next election. And a series of leaks and scandals forced think tank organiser Gerald O'Brien and later another of Kirk's men, Colin Moyle, to resign.
Colin Moyle, by this time a former cabinet minister, charged that a secret group of his ex-army officers had operated in New Zealand to bring down the third Labour government. He also alleges that we were setting up to basically cause his resignation from Parliament. This is a very interesting...
You were successful.
Well, yes. We were described in here as a group of very right-wing characters who were in the Territorial Army together.
Can you argue with that?
No. We were successful.
He'd helped to destabilise New Zealand's Labour government, and it appears he was subsequently paid by the secret services of one or more countries.
Paul Freeman seemed to be the Forrest Gump, if you like, of New Zealand. He was always in important events. He was always in the background figure. I don't know if it probably was at the Treaty of Waitangi. He's always been around, and somehow he figures as a shadowy figure in all of that. And I could never quite make out where he actually fitted in.
So, Paul Freeman remains an international man of mystery. He was responsible for putting the final nail into the Labour government's coffin, but he still insists that Norman Kirk alone drove himself to an early grave.
I've heard ministers in the Kirk administration say that he was drinking very heavily, and he had diabetes.
While Bob Harvey, on the other hand, believes there are still more questions than answers and is determined to keep the mystery alive.
I'm actually unrepentant in keeping the puzzle on the table. And now I notice more and more people are bringing pieces of the jigsaw to that puzzle and putting them in place. And I think all I have to do is stay alive a few more years, I guess. And I think maybe my theory, and it's been a theory which has been debunked by many and believed by quite a few, I might say, will probably be resolved.
Next week on Secret New Zealand, the World War II disasters we've swept under the mat, a wet idea for warfare that failed to make waves, and the stupid mistake that could have seen us all speaking Japanese.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.